Non-Pelagian synergist, because I can see a lot of the bad theologies comes out of today's monergism. Poisonous assumptions like the once saved, always saved no matter what you do. Also the mercilessness that predestination gives to the rich believers who look down on the poor or unsaved as inferior beings. Like the bless your heart history and mentality of the USA's Southern culture. The slave trade had a lot to do with that culture, but it was added to by Masonic and Gnostic beliefs who said Ham had sex with a raven on the ark and was cursed black. I told you my theory on how race developed. Each of the fallen angels intermingling with mankind before the flood and to a lesser extent after the flood helped the variation in species due to punctuated equilibrium evolution occurring from the cataclysmic changes we know as the flood. Tamiel/Kokabel, the fallen angel who taught astronomy, made Mongoloid, China. Barakijal, the one who taught astrology, is Australoid, India. Semjaza, who taught black magic or the cutting of roots, is Congoid, African. Amaros, who taught the solution to it or medicine or the stabilizing compound, is Caucasoid, Europe. And Azazel, the miner who taught weapons and makeup, is Capoid, indigenous Sumer or Americanoid. I got the skull shapes and the 5 primary skull shapes from some 19th century intellectual. I put mankind as Homo erectus before the fall, as Neanderthal before the flood, and after hybridization and the flood Homo sapiens. These were not inferior hominids to Homo sapien when it comes to thinking. Homo erectus would have been more docile, calm, and probably monogamous. It wasn't until the days after the fall before the flood that mankind as Neanderthal would have been polyamorous. As Homo sapiens, maybe somewhere in between as far as temperament. It makes sense that's why we are commanded to be monogamous in the scriptures. All 3 versions of mankind, Homo erectus, Neanderthal, and Homo sapien, would have had the same intelligence capacity despite skull shape. The emotional intelligence is what would change. The Nephilim were consumed with rage and others were ruled by emotions so that they could not think straight. Because of punctuated equilibrium evolutionary theory, due to the galaxy traveling through an event horizon and out a white hole as a mini Big Bang, that's how the variation in species could have occurred, as well as the difference in lifespans. This explains the change in the planet and the lifespans of mankind before and after the fall and the flood. Our measurements of time studying the Earth here are skewered because a lot happened in transit or in another location where length of life was immortal or hundreds of years according to the Bible. So we see the scars here on Earth that happened in another location and the entire galaxy, or even a cluster of them, and ours traveled together through the wormhole, which keep the months and years the same in each period. What looks like millions of years here, or an ice age, or the Yucatan Peninsula asteroid explosions happened in 40 days or 371 days there as a flood. Another cataclysmic event will kick off punctuated equilibrium evolution again. It's going to happen again at the second advent after the apocalypse of St. John, which can be said describes our galaxy traveling again through a type of wormhole to become evolved with longer lifespans again. As we were in the patriarch's age again to fulfill Isaiah 65 verse 20, only we don't turn into Neanderthals. And then punctuated equilibrium evolution happens from traveling through a wormhole again at the final resurrection when we get new bodies and join the martyrs who receive them at the second advent. That's sinking the idealist creationism, that everything was created to look like an old universe, and science together into one theory that can't be legitimately described as science fiction, because how can it be proven fiction? So it's religious fantasy more than science fiction. But eschatology is a theory and not a fantasy, and the theology is not heretical. It just might all be true. Even the Atlantean world described in ISBN 9798888627839. In today's traditions, they still believe that story about Ham in some occult circles, or now after Hitler's fall they mostly believe he turned black from the sun, or they have science outside of religion saying everyone originally was black. The Masons brought them over in order to mix the population in order to make USA a world empire in a new world order that would reach to China, who they idolized in economic empire and society. The state of, and Thomas Jefferson himself had a lot to do with that vision. His Jefferson Bible identifies him as a deist, which is usually Masonic and occult-based. The Founding Fathers' deists and Masons looked up to China when planning USA, and still do in some regards, but especially when USA was still uninhabited. They played both sides to take out the Protestant pilgrim groups that settled before 1776, along with the Catholic Church. They all used usury to break John Winthrop's city on a hill as well, to bring in the occult mercantile empire the Pilgrims ran away from. They were not just trying to flee from the Catholic Church in the 17th century. Now people came over for better opportunity and freedom. At Liberty Lodges, instead of Puritan communities which had been easily infiltrated and sabotaged by manipulating Masons and Eastern Stars in more than just Salem, Massachusetts. Alexander Hamilton was one of many of mercantilism's representatives at that time. While the English Northeast was being formed in this way, it was done economically, with central banking. Slavery was another industry, and in the South the French and the Spanish controlled. So they got in a fight, and the English mercantile empire got back in control. After that, it was Vanderbilt and Rockefeller, and the Glass-Steagall Act, and the brave New Deal with John Dewey's Pavlov Society. This changed the power of sovereignty from the family to the government. The education of Forrest Littletree explains how that system matriculated to most rural jurisdictions. How would they get a Puritan to own a slave? By importing Calvinists and changing the religion, slowly using religion as a cloak, setting up tent revival politicals, and pushing the social gospel that mixes religion and state, so that the secular state, as the Soviets did, infiltrate and rebrand their philosophies using Christian characteristics. One of the reasons why so much spiritual darkness rules over the churches. They do it with all the religions. They use them to coerce and control the public illegally for their own secular agendas. The Masonic vision is to create a millennial utopia. We know it now as a utopian globalism that transcends China. It was in the past National Socialism and Communism. It is now like a watermelon green environmentalism on the outside and red fascism in the inside. The 21st century, paved by the technology boom, created an industrial revolution that overrides the laws of each nation. As it is, it's communism for the poor, socialism for the 9-to-5 middle class, and fascism for the white-collared managerial technocratic elite. That's what it looks like from outside. The felons are the slaves that's allowed to exist as evil if they support the elite. Every county in USA has a Masonic affiliate or lodge. That's who took over this country, so that the Bohemian and Bilderberg Lodge became the modern-day Olympus, while DC and Congress became a Shakespeare checkers game. The occult today mostly believes God is a collective of all individuals existing as civilization, and they, like Rothschild, believed with other secular Jews like Herzl, in a future where they would establish themselves as God and usher in a utopia that failed and killed droves of people, including fascism, communism, and the abortion genocide just in the 20th century. They get in trouble because all they can do is look and plan for the future. They can't ever change anything while they are here. It's too hard a task, so they plan everything as a legacy, and it never is accomplished. It becomes irrelevant, unless they lay down the hammer, and then it's smashed. That's the ethos of the modern generation and the spirit of it. Most definitely anti-Christ, but even the Catholic Church they work with can be considered instead of Christ for a lot of its history too. They really shouldn't be involved in any of that until they can extend their lives past 150 years. It's like a kid playing in a laboratory with a bunch of chemicals with no labels, and all they have is a security camera footage with no sound, and it's blurry. It's impossible to predict without having been an adult for at least 130 years. And I'm sure at that age they wouldn't be concerned about moving anything to a utopia, but be mature enough to live life without being insane enough to play God, and be able to understand and perceive things alive in the realm of the spirit and see death for what it is, and understand its purpose and move on like you think a ghost would, like in an old Hollywood fantasy flick. We are at the polar end of the spectrum of character when it comes to what's left of John Knox and the Scottish Rite Illuminati rascals versus the Queen of England and Catholic Church from the history of John Knox's book. How else did society progress from Puritan to slaveholders? The freedom fighters have galvanized today as the same tyranny. They banded together to resist the tyranny of the crown and the Pope. Eventually, the beast emerges, and the conquered peoples resist the mark of the beast as a type of Protestant revolution of the two witnesses. And about those who never heard the gospel, and even those who have heard it, we can tell a lot by looking at the parables. In this case, the parable of the sheep and goats. Then the righteous will answer him, "Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go to visit you?" The king will reply, "Truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me." They also will answer, "Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or needing clothes or sick or in prison and did not help you?" He will reply, "Truly I tell you, whatever you did not do for one of the least of these, you did not do for me." Then we look at what these brothers and sisters are. While Jesus was still talking to the crowd, his mother and brothers stood outside, wanting to speak to him. Someone told him, "Your mother and brothers are standing outside, wanting to speak to you." He replied to him, "Who is my mother and who are my brothers?" Pointing to his disciples, he said, "Here are my mother and my brothers. For whoever does the will of my Father in heaven is my brother and sister and mother." Then we try to find out what the will of the Father is in circumstances where the gospel hasn't been reached or where it's been skewered or perverted. Not everyone who says to me, "Lord, Lord," will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. Many will say to me on that day, "Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and in your name drive out demons, and in your name perform many miracles?" Then I will tell them plainly, "I never knew you. Away from me, you evildoers." Jesus replied, "You shall not murder, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not steal, you shall not give false testimony, honor your father and mother, and love your neighbor as yourself." "All these I have kept," the young man said. "What do I still lack?" Jesus answered, "If you want to be perfect, go, sell your possessions and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. Then come, follow me." On one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. "Teacher," he asked, "what must I do to inherit eternal life? What is written in the law?" He replied, "How do you read it?" He answered, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself." "You have answered correctly," Jesus replied. "Do this, and you will live." But he wanted to justify himself, so he asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" Said, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was attacked by robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So too, a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper. 'Look after him,' he said, 'and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have.' Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers?" The expert in the law replied, "The one who had mercy on him." Jesus told him, "Go and do likewise." Now when Jesus saw the crowds, he went up on the mountain, and after he sat down, his disciples came to him. And he opened his mouth and began to teach them, saying, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the gentle, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be satisfied. Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called sons of God. Blessed are those who have been persecuted for the sake of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you and persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward in heaven is great, for in this same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. So we wind up with the criteria that you can't reject the word if you ever heard the gospel. You have to have understood the gospel though, and then rejected it. A lot of people disbelieve without understanding what it meant, like they think it's a worldly power or trick. Or they don't understand it. In that case, they are judged based on how they treat people according to the parable. The same is with the other faiths like Islam even. That's how he's able to judge the entire world and all generations. The responsibility, though, is on us to tell people and make them responsible. He doesn't want them to sleep through it and then be saved. He wants us to wake people up and make them responsible for how they react to it. If you say that you reject it and try and be a good person anyway, like you don't need the divine grace, you're damned. And if you turn your back on it, you're damned as well. There's all sorts of dimensions to God's judgment. In a place where the gospel is perverted or not preached, that's on us for not bringing it there, and they are judged whether they naturally are inclined to follow the Spirit, as a believer is called to be. That's the Holy Spirit at work everywhere, omnipresent still, regardless of generation or location. It's a theory still, but I'm sure it fits for those outside of Christianity that never heard of it in the last 2K years. Another reason that makes me sure is that it says anyone that doesn't take the mark of the beast is written in the book of life. That's a different term of salvation in the future. But when he's on earth shortly after that, they still will have to obey him before the final rebellion. Anyway, that's what makes me think about salvation for those outside of Christendom when I read the parable of the sheep and the goats. For me and people like me, we know better, and there's more required of us, and we are more responsible. And for those that don't know any better, it's our mission to tell them and make them responsible, especially if it costs our lives. Non-Pelagian synergist. I think monergism is part of what changed Protestantism from the 18th and 19th century type that was good at Bible study to the mess we see today. https://www.compellingtruth.org/monergism-versus-synergism.html